Hello, I'm DK Rosner. Welcome to the TTT News Special. Now, in remembering one of the seminal events to shape our history, namely the Black Power Revolution, we are joined by political leader of the National Joint Action Committee, Kwasi Mutema. So we say, hello, Mr. Mutema, how are you at this point in time?
Hello, DK. I'm pretty all right. Safe, definitely, at this point. And it's a pleasure for me to join you here on this very, very significant day today, our 51st anniversary of the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution of 1970, also termed the Black Power Revolution of 1970.
Now, even before April 21, some 51 years ago, as you would have just said, take me through the ideas at play that lead to the National Joint Action Committee being formed, please, Mr. Mutema.
Well, DK, NJAC was formed the year before that. That was 1969. It was 52 years ago, by a group of individuals, most of whom were students at UWI, along with some members within the trade union movement and other activists. In fact, I think today it is only fitting for us to pay tribute, give respect to those founding members of the National Joint Action Committee, because they would have paid a very heavy price in taking that initial step towards a process of known as the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution, from which so many of us benefit today. Many of the rights, many of the privileges that we enjoy today is directly due to the efforts of these men and women who made that very brave and courageous steps 52 years ago. Some have passed away, they've gone to the land beyond, and some are here with us still. I'd just like to acknowledge those members, starting with the founding father himself, Chief Servant, Brother Makandal Dagger, who is one who is no longer with us. Also no longer with us was George Weeks, the former president of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, John Commission and Lionel Beckles, who were also members of the OWTU at that time. Mr. Selwyn John, who was leader at one time of the NUGFW, Ms. Shirley Jones, and Mr. Alfred Fraser from the University of the West Indies, and Mr. Francis Bedo and Joe Young of the Transport and Industrial Workers Union. Those are the members who were part of that team who is no longer with us, they have passed on. Those who are still with us here today, Brother Ayogoro Ome, former deputy political leader of NJAC, Brother Kafra Kambon, who was chairman of the Emancipation Support Committee, now the role of an advisor, Brother Augustus Ramrika Singh, who was a former Minister of Education, Mr. Errol Balfour, Mr. Clyde Nunes, and Mr. Langston Roach, who went on to form the Lana Industries, the owner of the Lana Industries. And those are the members who are still with us here today. So I think as a nation, we owe a very great debt of gratitude to these men and women. And we say a big thank you to them, and may the ancestors, the Almighty God, continue to protect and guide those who are still here with us today.
And I want to thank you for taking the time to actually basically pour that verbal libation, Mr. Mutema, because sometimes we find names and the works of great ones kind of being faded into oblivion by the sands of time.
Correct.
But in terms, and I also wanted to take time with me in terms of almost like read and spell, because sometimes you get information, but you say, okay, well, there must be more in the mortar than the pestle. So we want to go to the date itself now. Yeah. What is the significance of that date in question?
Well, DK, April 21st, 1970 It's one of the most significant days, I would say, in the history of that revolution of 1970, known as the Black Power Revolution or the Trinidad and Tobago Revolution. And by extension, it is one of the most significant days in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. I think to understand that date, we first need to understand that the two major pillars of the revolution were people's power and national unity. And that date, April 21st, 1970, the main significance of that date was the declaration of the first state of emergency. It was the first time the state of emergency would have been declared. And the leaders of NJAC were rounded up. Some were taken to Nelson Island, some were taken to Royal Jail. But I think we need to understand the real reason for that state of emergency, because still today, so many would have the opinion that the reason for that state of emergency was because of violence that was developing within the demonstrations. And that isn't so at all. You just use a term there, which I think also applies to this case. They were more in the mortar besides the pestle. And to understand April 21st, 1970, we have to go back a bit to the month before that, March 12th in 1970, when that was the date when NJAC led a most historic march known as the March to Caroni, a march that left Woodford Square in Port of Spain with, I think, almost as much as 40,000 people, who led primarily Africans from North Trinidad, who went into central Trinidad, defying the establishment. Because when that march, when the decision was taken, all type of attempts were made to prevent that march by the government at the time, PNM government under Eric Williams, the opposition at the time, which was led by Badi's Maraj, the big business, the elites of the society, they all tried as much as possible to prevent that march, recognizing that if such a march was allowed to take place, it would have very much affected the status quo of the country, which was one to maintain that division between the two major races, the Africans and the Indians, and leave the country in a very polarized state, because the establishment was benefiting from that division. NJAC decided to challenge the status quo, and so lead that march to central Trinidad, which ended in Cuba, which was one of the most successful demonstrations that was held by NJAC in 1970, because those who were part of that march were welcomed with open arms by the Indian population within central Trinidad. We were given food to drink, they were given food to eat, refreshed with drink, water, juice, everything you can think of, and were treated like family. It was beyond the expectations of the country. What was planned eventually at the end of that march, what was planned was a return march. In fact, the Indians of central Trinidad planned a return march to Port of Spain on the 21st of April, 1970. I think when that word came out, I think is when all hell broke loose.
And on that note, Mr. Mutema, on that note, because I want us to get back to that point, so remember your point and we're coming back to it. We are speaking with political leader of the NJAC, Mr. Kwasi Mutema. Stay with us. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with a political leader of NJAC, Mr. Kwasi Mutema. Now, what I hear you saying just before we went to the break is news to me, Mr. Mutema. Because yes, you hear about the leg or the march from Port of Spain to Caroni to Couva, but you don't hear anything about the return leg and the fact that that is something that was going to be joined. And many times, people who are trying to fulfill lower tiers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they see things differently. So we want to get to what it is we can do to help stop some of those polarizing currents or those lines of divisions in a bit. But please, continue taking me to school.
Yeah. Yes, BK. That return march was planned to take place on the 21st of April. And recognizing that once that succeeded, it would have been a total transformation of the society where that ethnic division is concerned, where that polarization is concerned, because you had now demonstrated to the world, right, the two major races joining each other, not in the rural districts in terms of central, but now within the urban section of the country, totally exposed to the world. What happened eventually? The government got word of it. The establishment got word of the plan. And they began immediately to concoct their own plan and put efforts in train to prevent that march. A demonstration was planned before that march on the 21st. A demonstration was planned in North Trinidad, in Port of Spain, for Thursday, the 16th of April. That demonstration is to leave Woodford Square, come down Charlotte Street, and make its way right through the major communities in North Trinidad. What happened is that on its way down Charlotte Street, at that time, the NJAC leadership was not aware that a special branch of the police service had planted provocateurs, agent provocateurs, in the demonstration to cause provocation and to initiate acts of violence. These agent provocateurs, what they did as the march made way street closer to Independence Square, many of them ran into the stores and began to remove goods from the shelves and smash showcases. Obviously, the police responded. And they came with their tear gas, their batons, their horses, and everything. Obviously, also, you would have had other members of the demonstration now, some of the actual demonstrators who joined in that act, right, within the fashion showcases and so on. What followed is that the Prime Minister of the country then, Dr. Eric Williams, gave a speech saying, yes, he is all for Black Power, but not if it includes all this violence and so on. That they began to paint that picture of all this violence taking place and cannot be tolerated. And that was on the 16th. On the 21st, the government got the excuse they needed to call that state of emergency, which in truth and in fact was not really target any violence in any demonstration, but was to prevent that return march by the Indians from central Trinidad to Port, because they knew that would have been the end of this status quo, this ethnic division. If that return march took place, today we may not have been having to refer to a country that is so polarized as we see it now.
And what you're saying to me, it feels a bit mind-blowing, although sadly it doesn't feel surprising. And I make the distinction between both because there would have been so many people looking for the verdict for the police officer, I believe, involved with the death of Mr. Floyd.
Basil Davis. Sorry,
Definitely.
sorry.
But
Yeah.
but at the same time, we see parallels, we see similarities. So what are some of those things that we can do at this point in time to avoid that kind of polarity, that efforts towards dividing and conquering? Because it seems as though it's the same kind of ethos, but things have become a little more refined or a little more efficient. So it's still happening.
It's more subtle. Yeah. I think, BK, I think for one thing is that we all need to re-examine the events of 1970. We all need to re-examine the revolution of 1970 through new lens. We have to sit and take a revised look of that period with new lens, removing all the prejudices that may have affected our thinking, that would have colored our view of things, all the misinformation, the propaganda, and so on, and rather put on new lens of truth and objectivity to take a new look at that period, re-examine the period, learn from the lessons of that period, because the reality is that most of the issues that were raised by NJAC during that period of 1970, many of those issues are still relevant today. Many of those problems, those challenges are still with us today. The point is that I make no apologies for stating this. Trinidad and Tobago have no right to be in this sad situation that we are in today. Because fortunately, as a nation, we have been very blessed with so much resources. Added to that, we were blessed with that period of that revolution in 1970, when so many issues, so many problems were articulated for us by the leaders of the National Joint Action Committee, where solutions were provided as well to deal with these problems.
But Mr. Mutema, with about a minute to go, what are some of those solutions? Because you just spoke about solutions, and you also spoke about some of those lessons. So with the minute that we have, please edify us.
For example, if we look at the economy, I'll take that as one, but there are many. I'll take the economy. Today we speak of this problem of foreign exchange, right? We speak of diversification and so on. Security and agriculture. Since 1970, a serious effort was made by NJAC, and it was, again, one of the core issues. This question of having greater pride of ourselves in what we own. This question of local ownership. In fact, our economy at that time was totally foreign owned. It is 1970 that brought about the localization of our industries. NJAC was speaking about going beyond the question of localization of our industries. And even in terms of our very approach to our taste patterns, for example, as part of that localization, where we will have greater pride and value in what we own, in what we produce. And therefore, we would not have to be dependent, as we are today, on foreign goods.
Both foreign goods and services. And I take the point of being more proud in what we own, what we produce, and eventually being proud when we look into the mirror and see who we see. But I want to thank you very much, Mr. Mutema, Kwasi Mutema, political leader of the National Joint Action Committee. And we want to thank you on behalf of the entire news team for joining us. Have a good one.